Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Can you guys read me? I got one affirmative sign. Hopefully more can hear me. Don't panic here. I am going to log out of the room and come back in. I'm not sure my recording is working. So again, I'm going to leave for a moment. I'll be right back in here. Hold on. Thank you. Okay, everybody. Good evening. I hope you can pardon me there. I had probably logged in too long ago, and my screen seemed to be frozen up. So, and it appears like several of you are having difficulty getting in because I keep seeing the same individuals coming and going from the classroom. Sometimes you have to log off completely off of your computer and then try again. Sometimes that clears it, sometimes it doesn't. But if anybody's having contact with people who are having trouble getting in, that's one suggestion to try, is again to log off completely. But I'm doing this from my house tonight, so hopefully I've done this many times from my house before without difficulty, so hopefully tonight will be no technical difficulties beyond the normal. But let's do a triple check here. You should be able to see me and hear me, and you should see a PowerPoint slide. So are we 3 for 3 on those things? I know it's difficult to see me, and it's tough to look at. I know, as my daddy said, you ain't much, but you're all we got. Well, again, welcome. This is a very important evening in terms of content. I'm suggesting that perhaps several of you might even want to review this archive even though you're going to be in this session. Seems like when we lost the one session, even though I changed some of the deadlines for things, it still seems like we've not been able to get into a good groove yet, and I don't feel like this is moving forward like I usually want it to do. It just seems to be a little bit rushed here right now. So there is a fair amount of content tonight. I am assuming that some of that's going to be revisited again next week as we have another session, and I'm assuming I may have to give you another week on the QBE assignment. That's one of those projects that we work for 100% proficiency, so I would prefer to have you come close to being 100% proficient the first time you submit it, rather than having me have to grade and regrade several times, although that still probably is going to be the case. I think that's probably what we're looking at. But there is a lot of content that I think inarguably is important to every educator in Georgia, which is to try to understand in some detail how our funding system works in Georgia. So that's our plan for the evening. We're going to do some quick review going back, because we didn't have any class last week, so we're going back 2 weeks. Some review over where we were a couple of weeks ago is one thing for us to do tonight. The red text here is new stuff, all related to the Georgia Quality Basic Education Program, the QBE. It is our state funding program. Has 2 parts, a basic categorical part, which is fairly similar to what you see in many other states, and then we have our own unique equalizing program that was developed by the General Assembly of Georgia. Looks different than any other state, but certainly has some common characteristics. So there really are 2 main parts to the state program. I've got some comments, hopefully helpful comments, about upcoming assignments. For those of you that are still not having your eyes glazed over a little bit later, I've taken grade 1 from our QBE exercise and I've put a sample or an example together so we can look at that, and then we can deal with your questions. Certainly will be done by the time allotted, but I'm just giving you a slight amount of warning. There's more content in the session tonight than is normal, and maybe is more than I like to do, but that's really kind of where we're at in terms of trying to give you the skills you need and the knowledge you need to take a good stab at the QBE project. So that's the agenda. The objectives, again, are some review, and then really the main objective for the night is to learn both aspects of a foundation funding program, which is what we have in Georgia, our QBE, the basic categorical program, and the equalization component. You're going to find the equalization component more difficult to understand than the basic categorical aspect. That's why I'm suggesting perhaps another set of examples and work and thinking about it and getting some practice with it and revisiting this again next week. You'll find the equalization program to be understandable, but the first time you look at it, it may not seem understandable, but I am assuming that you have read item 3.3, which is, I believe, a 10-page document I put together. You can't find textbooks and materials just on the QBE. What we've got is what I developed, wrote, and created. So item 3.3 is the best document that I'm aware of that gives us that basic information about how the Georgia program works. So if you have not studied, read, looked at 3.3, you're at somewhat of a deficit right now, but beyond that, know that after this class session ends, and as you're working forward on the QBE, 3.3 is critical for you. And one last thing to say, there is a video posted on the Dropbox. I had that video done about a year ago, so the lady that's doing the video is going to be using some numbers that have already become outdated because the QBE changes sometimes a couple of times a year, but there is a video posted that's an example of how you would go about figuring out the QBE exercise. So if you have not seen the video posted in the Dropbox, look at the video posted in the Dropbox. Are you still good? You still see me? You still hear me? I know it's tough to see me, but we're ready to jump right in. You've seen this slide before. Just want to point out again that one of the conclusions from this slide is that if a state uses a property tax to fund schools, because this tax digest is essentially the value of all the property in an area, if you're going to use a property tax, you're going to have inequities, you're going to have disparities, you're going to have challenges in terms of funding schools adequately across the state. And as we've seen in this example for two previous sessions, even though District A and B each gave equal effort, they both taxed themselves at 20 mills, which, as we recall from 2 weeks ago, that's a tax rate of asking, or in effect mandating, the taxpayers give $20 for every $1,000 of value in property they have. They're giving that amount to support the schools. We have very different results, even though the effort is exactly the same. And the reason the results are different is because we have a wealthier District B than A. Effort same, results different. We're thumbs up on this, yes? We've looked at this previously. You're supposed to be saying yes. Okay, some of you are. Or you're supposed to be saying no. We forget that. Good, good, good. Now, I have the same slide with a slightly different variation now. We have not looked at a slide like this. I'm trying to deepen your understanding of where we've been in previous weeks. We have the same example, except District A is stepping it up. They know they need more money to support their kids, so what they've done is double, in this hypothetical example, they've doubled their tax rate, and they're not taxing at 20 mills anymore. They're now at 40 mills. They're asking their taxpayers, not asking, they're requiring their taxpayers to give $40 for every $1,000 of value to support the schools. So now we have the situation of A is taxing itself twice as much as B. They're giving twice as much effort. They're giving a great effort here. They're giving everything they've got. But look at the results. Again, the results are anything but equitable. A is still at a structural deficit because A is so much less wealthy than B. They gave 2 times the effort and got 1/5 of the results. This is a real issue, and what this illustrates, not just the problem, it also illustrates that the solution to this problem is beyond the means of District A. District A can really do nothing to save themselves from this problem because in this example, they're taxing even twice as much as they're legally allowed to, and it still is not providing the basis for them on an equal footing with B to educate the kids who live in District A. So again, 2 points to get out of this. Point 1 is that the effort is greater, yet the results are still inadequate. But more than anything, I'm trying to illustrate that District A is really hopeless by itself in this example, and it needs to be fixed or addressed by the state at a larger level using the wealth of a larger portion of the state. Thumbs up on this. I saw one thumb. The rest of them looked like they were middle fingers or something. That was a bad joke, right? Technology's still good, still here, still can see the PowerPoint, yes. Dawn gets the A for the night with the smiley face. Let's move forward. In terms of review, 2 weeks ago, we looked at the notion that each state decides for itself how to split up its funds for schools. Each state decides for itself what type of a funding model they want to incorporate. We gave some examples 2 weeks ago that historically, back in the olden times, there was no state role in terms of funding. Local areas like townships got together and created a school in their smaller local area. They funded it locally, typically through some kind of a property tax system. But in this model, there is no state funding. Then we also talked 2 weeks ago about a simple model where the state would appropriate a certain amount of money and then they would create a mathematical calculation and simply divide the money up based on FTE, the number of students. So again, the example I gave 2 weeks ago, if you had $1 million appropriated by the state and you had $1 million or 1 million students in the state, if the state was using a pure flat grant, they'd give every district $1 for every kid they've got. I think these two are easy for you to see, and these two are really not the more modern kind of school financing. We've gone more to the foundation, power equalization, and full state funding here in the 21st century and 20th century, certainly since after World War I and after the Great Depression. We've certainly had more school funding models that look like the three on the right. So we're still good, yes? Let's see if we can distinguish and recall the difference between a foundation program and power equalization. They're very similar in terms of they probably have a basic program that funds students that are in certain categories, a certain amount of money. But the difference between a foundation and power equalization program is in a foundation program, the state has established a certain foundation amount. In Georgia, it's the 75th percentile that was selected. And essentially what that means is all of the districts that are less wealthy than the 75th ranked district in the state will get some state foundation money, contrasted with a power equalizing state, which has made the decision to not use the 75th percentile. They're going to use the 100th percentile, which is the richest district in the state. And in a power equalization model, the state is guaranteeing a foundation amount of 100%, meaning all power is equal in this state. The richest district can raise no more with its property tax levies than any other district in the state, because the state agrees to bring everybody up to that level of whatever the richest district can raise through its property tax system per kid, per mill. Then the state will bring everybody up to that level with state money. And as we talked about 2 weeks ago, there's usually more strings attached to the power equalization. If you want the state money, usually there are requirements on what you have to do to get the state money. Even Georgia has some requirements. If you want to get up to the 75th percentile foundation equalization money, there are some strings even that you have to take in Georgia. And then finally, we talked 2 weeks ago about a full state funding model like Hawaii. Vermont is very close to a full state funding model. I think the state of Washington is very close to this kind of a model where there really isn't the issue of rich district, poor district. The state really, through state taxes, takes all the funds for schools and then sends it back out to the local districts. The liberty is pretty much gone in this model, the liberty of the local school boards making local decisions about local tax rates. The state, in a full state funding model, has really taken those decisions away. It's the most equitable funding, but there's the least liberty in that kind of a model. Let's check for our understanding here. That was a quick review from 2 weeks ago. Here are 5 checking for understandings. Here are the answer choices in red. I took no state funding away as an answer, so we don't use that one for this. So take just a minute. I'll put a sock in my mouth. Take a minute, look at these 5 and see what you think the best answer is using these 4 red choices at the top. Okay, hopefully that was enough downtime, wait time for you to think about the best answers. Regarding the first one, the least potential for equity, why don't you type what you think the answer is to that? Least potential for equity. We've got several votes for flat grant, and I'll buy that. I think that's your best answer amongst these choices. There really is no equity in that. It's just a mathematical calculation. Okay, very good. I think we're 1 for 1 for the most part. Let's look at the second one. The state takes action and it eliminates, key word here is eliminates, the funding gap between the rich and the poor. I like the answers I'm reading. I think it is both. That's what power equalization does, and it's also what full state funding does. They both do that. There is no gap between the richest and the poor. The richest is the targeted amount. So I agree with all of your answers on that, and I think both of those, you can't distinguish between those 2 answers because that's exactly what both of those things do. So we're 2 for 2. We're batting 1,000 here. How about number 3 here? The state reduces the gap but does not eliminate it. I like foundation. In power, a couple of you bid on power there. In power, there is no gap. The gap has been eliminated in power because, again, if Rabun County, Georgia is the wealthiest county in terms of how much money they raise per kid, per mill through their property taxes, whatever that amount of money is that Rabun County earns, that's the target amount that the state provides state funding to bring everybody up to that amount. So it really does eliminate the gap between the rich and the poor. Again, the only difference being there are strings attached to get those state monies most of the time, but there really is no gap in a power equalization. Everybody's brought up to that richest district level. some people would say, well, Georgia should do that. The biggest reason why Georgia does not do that is how much that would cost. Georgia has difficulty even funding the foundation program at the 75th percentile, and in fact doesn't fully fund that. So to think about going up to the 100th percentile, which would be I don't know how many more $1 million, I don't see the state being able to support that. What about number 4? The least liberty from these answer choices would be, you guys were just waiting to answer that question, weren't you? I like full as your answer for least, again, because in the context of school finance, we're thinking of liberty in terms of the control that local people have of their own tax dollars, and that local decision makers will be setting those taxing amounts for schools. That's what school boards do. But if you have full state funding, you essentially have eliminated one of the most important roles of a school board, because in full state funding, there is no property tax. We're using state taxes like sales tax and income tax, and the state has said to the locals, you don't have the authority to property tax anymore. We're handling it here in Atlanta. We'll send you your share of the money after we collect it in Atlanta. So that is the least liberty, full state funding. The most liberty, what do we have for number 5? If no state funding was an answer choice, that would be the answer choice, but I didn't give that to you. So it's got to be flat, or I guess you could try to argue foundation, but it's definitely either flat or foundation, again, because those are leaving intact the authority of local school boards to set millage rates and to determine how to spend that portion of their funding without any interference, or with less interference from the state. I hope you felt pretty good about those 5. Let's do one more quick review. I'm going to throw something else at you. Let's see how good you remember from 2 weeks ago. What would be the taxable amount of a fair market value $100,000 home? If you think you know the answer, go ahead and type it. Yes, I buy all this, that it's 40% or $40,000. Remember, we don't pay taxes in Georgia on the full 100%. We only pay taxes on 40%. So good, hooray, hooray. 0.010 is actually how many mills? What does that decimal come out to? Allie must be a math major or a math minor in addition to science. It is 10 mils, which again we know means, what does that mean in practical terms? You're telling the taxpayers, give us $10 out of your pocket for every $1,000, so it's 10 per 1,000, exactly. 20 mils as a decimal would look like what? Number 3. What would this decimal look like? 20 mils. Again, it is 0.02. We're talking about moving decimal places 3 places. I'm not a math teacher. I'm not a math person, but it's tens, then hundreds, then thousands, and we know mils are on a metric that's per 1,000, so it would be 0.020. And then number 4, you don't need a calculator to know what this tax bill would be. I made this one very simple. If the tax rate's 20 mils, and the 40% value is $1,000. Ooh, I'm still waiting to see the right answer on this. What would the tax bill be? It's 20 bucks. Yes, it's 20 bucks. Remember, 20 bucks is 20 per 1,000. And what do we have in this case? We have property valued at only 1,000. So 20 per 1,000 is 20 bucks. Okay, I think you did pretty well on that. So give yourself a pat on the back. It tells me you are ready to take a look at the QBE. Are you patting yourself on the back now? I would be patting you if I could right now. You're good? Let's do it. I'm ready to jump into this. I'm ready for us to learn more about a foundation program, more about Georgia's QBE program. And again, I'm assuming you've read 3.3. If you have not, that should be like job number 1 for you to do as soon as possible. I'm excited to do it. Let's do it. Here's what we've got in Georgia. It's a foundation program. We've discussed that already. We have a basic part. We have an equalization part. You're going to find the basic part pretty easy to understand. You're going to find the equalization part requires some more thought. But why do we call this a foundation program? Look here at the bottom. Because the state of Georgia has established a foundation amount that no district will receive less than this amount. And that really applies or pertains to the equalization part of this. Poor little Pelham City, which is the poorest district in Georgia, has been promised that even though on their own, if we think back to our previous example, let's think back to this example here one more time. Poor Pelham City, let's just pretend Pelham City is District A. They're trying real hard to support their kids in their schools. They've doubled their tax rate, and they still don't have jack. They still don't have enough money to do much with it. So what the state has promised, back to where we are now, the state has promised, we recognize where you're at, Pelham City. We recognize you can't solve this problem on your own. Therefore, we will guarantee you, using state money, we will get you up to a higher level so there's not such a massive deficit between the haves and the have-nots in Georgia. And as we've learned in class, at least from me mentioning, Georgia established a 75th percentile as the targeted foundation amount for everybody. So again, let's go back up to the basic program. All 185 systems in Georgia earn money based upon different categories of perceived need. So here's where we really see equity coming in. Kindergartners get more than 12th graders. EIP students get more than non-EIP students. Special education category 4 students get a lot more money than category 1. Special ed gets more than general ed. So we have all kinds of equity, what we would call vertical equity, in our basic program in Georgia, meaning you get more money based upon kids that are in certain programs. Let's take a look at what some of these are, and if you started the QBE exercise, you already know this. Here are some examples. Notice this says it's not all inclusive. There are, I believe, 18 different program weights in Georgia, so we're looking at only about 7 or 8 on this slide. But if you go clear to the bottom, if you'll draw your eyes down to the bottom, the high school program, grades 9 through 12, has been established as the base, meaning there's a base per student amount, and it's about $2,400 now. It used to be closer to $3,000, but like everything else, states broke, so they cut it back down. But that's the lowest amount of money you get for any kid in a Georgia school is a general education high school student. So the program weight for high school general ed kids is 1. But let's contrast that with, say, the early intervention kindergarten. You see this number in red. That's a weight that's given to early intervention kindergarten kids. So in effect, for every $1 you would get for a high school student in state funds in this basic category program, if you have kids in a kindergarten early intervention program, you get $2.03 essentially, as compared to every $1 you're going to get for a high school kid. So essentially you're getting more than twice as much funds per kid for a kindergarten EIP as you're getting for a general education high school student. And you can see the differences, and these are just here for illustration. This is not the entire list. But essentially the state has made decisions that certain categories, the needs are greater. Like, for example, kindergarten, the idea, the philosophy is, we'll support these children when they're young. Let's not let them fall behind. It's a better investment to put more resources in the lower grades, and that way we can prevent the need to remediate kids that move higher up. And you see the EIP kids get more funding. They're determined to have more need, etc. Middle school gets less money than elementary, but more money than high school. So these are numerous examples of vertical equity that are a part of the basic categorical program. All the systems in Georgia count their students. They determine which programs their students are in. Then they submit reports, and they receive state money that's based upon how many kids are in these different programs. The difference between middle grade and middle school is, again, I'm not a middle school person, but I don't even remember which one's which. I think the middle school, you get more money in the middle school because you promise to do things like teaming, have the exploratory classes. I don't know if advising is supposed to be a part of that. The middle grades is more like a junior high. You have not made the commitment to do the teaming and the exploratories necessarily. You get more money if you are a middle school, but you are promising to do more things to get the more money. I haven't heard anything about the middle school funding going away. I don't know whether it is or not. I don't know if that's a question, Gene, or if that's like a fact. I hadn't heard that, but I know all of this is being looked at right now. Everybody thinks, we need to have more money. We're having our discussions in class now about where to put our money, but there's a basic agreement, certainly among educators, that they'd like to see schools be funded more, and there's some people that would like to see these numbers change, and everybody kind of has their own vision of what's the fairest way to do this. So it wouldn't surprise me to see some significant changes happen to this program in the future. Let's go back to our previous slide. So in the basic program, here's what your systems are doing. They're counting your kids. You're determining which categories and which weights you have, how many kids in, and basically you're submitting electronically reports that will allow you to earn a certain amount of state funding based upon how many kids you have in which categories. I'm going to move ahead again here. So these are the key parts of the basic, these are the key parts of the basic program. Georgia students are counted as 6 segments. So one kid is 1 FTE, 1 full-time equivalent, which is actually 6 segments. So you're counting a kid 6 times in a day. So one kid could be in 6 different programs. He could be, or she could be, in gifted. She could be in vocational. She could be in special education category 1. She could be in general ed. You are responsible to account for the kids in 6 segments. Where is their butt at 6 points during the day? So one kid, 1 FTE is 6 segments. And as we've already looked at on the previous slide, you earn different amounts of state funds based upon the segments and the program weights. And we've already mentioned on the previous slide that the high school basic program in high school, the general education program in high school, does not qualify for any extra money. All you get is the base money, which is like $2,400 for every high school kids. And understand that there are other ways that your districts earn money that when we're doing our simulation for this class, I didn't include them in it, but you get some money to have a superintendent. You get some money for principals and assistant principals. You get some money for professional development. You get your money for teachers' level of experience and teachers' degrees, the training and experience levels. So you earn other funds besides just these amounts, but for our purposes, most of your money comes from the categories that your kids are in. So again, let's take another look at this. I'm trying to help you with your QBE exercise and common sense here. You have one kid, Mary. You have to turn in Mary in 6 segments. Now, Mary may be 6 segments of general ed, or Mary may be some combination. She may be 3 segments general ed, 3 segments gifted ed. But somehow in your student information system, somebody or some bodies have the responsibilities in your school to make sure that the kids' schedules are accurate and that you have the kids in the right classes, the right programs, because those classes and programs qualify for different amounts of money. And you earn money based upon segments which are translated into FTEs, which I will give an example of. I see a question from Andrew. I'll give an example if you'll wait just a second. So again, let's go back again, keep going back. The basic program, which is all we're looking at so far, we have different categories. You earn money based upon weights and how many FTE or segments you have in each of those categories. You submit that electronically to the state. You probably submit it to your central office first, then the central office submits it to Atlanta, and then you begin receiving money based upon what you've submitted in the future. You get money, you're getting money right now for what you submitted like 6 months ago. I see a question from Kylie, and you can't count a kid in one segment in more than one spot. Right. I'm not sure what you mean, but each kid, if they are attending school full-time, has 6 segments. So you count them 6 times during the day. I'm not sure you're ready for this yet. I'm pausing. I'm waiting for more questions. If your EIP 1 segment and your regular 1 segment, that's 2 segments. But 1 segment wouldn't be both of those. Agreed. I'm still waiting to see if there's any more. I'm going to show you how this works. So okay, let's move ahead and I'll show you. I think you're ready for an example. Sure, you would have some kids who would be special ed and ESOL both. That's right about, you guys are moving so fast here. Megan said, yeah, that's right, Megan. I agree, that's right. Exactly. But again, Andrea, they have to be receiving those services, otherwise you can't count them in that category. You know, we could have this discussion. I don't remember how many of you are special education educators. I don't know if any of you are now that I'm thinking about it, but some districts, I guess you could argue, would have the philosophy of aggressively identifying children for special education services because you receive extra funding from the state for those classifications. But I'm not sure the state funding ever actually provides all the funding that's necessary to educate those children with disabilities. So I'm not sure you're really coming out ahead, but I'm just trying to give the example that, yes, some districts are very aggressive in like gifted. Yeah, here I see Andrea's got a comment here. She's thinking one step ahead of me. If you get a gifted certified teacher, you may be able to count more students in gifted segments, and you receive extra state funding based upon gifted as being one of those categories. So certainly many districts spend a lot of money, and there actually are consultants who charge districts money to come in and teach you to make sure you are maximizing your accounts and getting the kids in the most financially advantageous categories possible. I'm not sure how much groups charge or consultants charge to do that, but I know there are consultants in Georgia that provide those services to school systems. Okay, I hope I haven't missed anybody's question or comment, but let's do an example here before we look at the more confusing part of this. In the QBE exercise, and if you haven't looked at it yet, we have an exercise that's coming due. It's a simulation, basically, where I've given you some data about a fictitious school system. And in this exercise, I told you one of the givens in the exercise is that every grade level has 20 students. How many segments is that? I'm testing you here. It is 120. Thank you, Jennifer. I think you were first on that. 20 students is 120 segments, because remember, a student is 6 segments if he or she is attending full-time. In this example, we're doing the grade 1 example for our QBE exercise. One of the givens in the problem says 5 students in grades 1 through 3 are mainstreamed in category 5 all day. Okay, how many segments would that be? 5 students all day would be how many segments? 30, right? Yeah, it would be 30. So let's look at the next bullet. 5 children per grade, this is another one of the givens in the problem, receive EIP services in grades K through 5, 1 period a day. How many segments is that? 5 children, 1 period a day. Exactly, Dawn. It is 5 segments. And then another given in the problem is that at each grade level, except K, there are 10 students taking gifted classes 1 period a day. So we have 10 students, 1 period or 1 segment a day. So how many segments is that? 10 students, 1 time a day. It's 10. We're assuming a period is a segment. Okay, so these are 4 givens in this problem that all relate to grade 1 in the problem or in the simulation. Let's go to the next slide. So what do we do with this stuff? I know this print is small. I apologize. This is one way to do this. There are many ways to calculate this. I'm showing you one way that makes sense to me. You may think of a better way to do this or a way that makes more sense to you, so this is not the only way to do this. So let's go back to what we know about grade 1. I hope you can read this. I know the print is small, but you can actually make this larger if you see at the top of your page. We know that each grade level has 20 students, which is 120 segments. Yes? You guys, you're with me here. I'll take questions in just a minute, okay? Let's finish this example. 20 students, 120 segments. We know that there's 5 special ed students that are all day in special ed category 5. So that's 30 segments we know are in category 5. And then we know there's 5 students that are in EIP once a day. That's 5 segments. And we know we have 10 students in 1 segment per day of gifted. So that's 10 segments. We just repeated what we already said. Now what do we do with those numbers? We know we have 120 FTE segments in grade 1. We already know that of those 120 segments, 30 segments are special education category 5. And we know that 5 segments are EIP, and we know that we have 10 gifted segments. So if you subtract all those segments that are not regular, our special ed category 5, our EIP, our gifted, that leaves us with 75 regular segments. So what do we do with that? If we take the segments and convert them back to full-time equivalents, back to full-time kids, we can get a number that we can calculate very easily how much money we're going to earn, because the state tells us it will give us $2,430 for every kid. So if we take these segments and convert them back into kids, then we can do a simple multiplication calculation. So if I take my 75 regular segments and divide by 6, I've just figured out that of my 20 first graders, 12.5 of them are receiving the regular education program. I take my 30 special education students, divide by 6, and now I have 5 full-time kids that I can count for Category 5. Notice my note here about don't count those kids again, because this is grades 1 through 3. And the reason, I know some of you are laying an egg on how you can do that, the reason you can do grades 1 through 3 together is the amount of state funding is actually the same. You may not know that, but I know that. So I'm able to take a little shortcut here. But finishing our thought here, our early intervention, we have 5 segments out of 6, so it's less than 1 full kid getting EIP. And you have 10 gifted, and you're dividing by 6, you have like 1.66 kids as being gifted. So if you add up all these segments, it should equal 20. But what we've done here is we've broken them down into their different categories, and we know of that 20, how much we're going to be able to turn in for regular funding, how much we're going to be able to turn in for special ed Category 5, how much for EIP, how much for gifted. So let's take one more slide on the example, and then I'll be glad to try to respond to questions. So here's the last step to figuring out how much money we're going to earn in first grade. If you multiply your FTE count, which is what we just did, by the base, the state gives us this number. The state says, okay, you can have $2,430 per FTE. That's the basic amount. And then if you multiply by the program weight, that will tell you how much money you're going to earn in each of these categories. So let's see what we've done here. We already calculated, we know that of the 20 first graders, the equivalent of 12.5 of them is in the regular program. So we take 12.5 times the base, and then what's this crazy number, 1.2849? That's the extra weight you get for kindergarten or for first grade. And how do you know that number? That's in document 3.3. All the weights are there. You don't have to memorize that number. But essentially, you're getting $1.28 for every dollar that you get for a high school kid. You're getting an extra 28 cents for a first grader. So basically, those 12.5 kids have earned you almost $40,000. Same thing for the next 3 categories. You've got the special ed kids. There's 5 of them. We just calculated that. Multiply by the base, and then you see a much larger categorical weight for special ed Category 5, and you get about $30,000 for those special education kids. The EIP, we have less than 1 kid equivalent in EIP. Multiply by the base, multiply by the EIP weight, you get about $3,600, etc. So you would add these 4 numbers together, and your 20 children at grade 1 would bring that much revenue under the Georgia QBE base program to your system. Noting again that for Category 5, we lumped grades 2 and 3 in there, and we could get away with doing that because this number 2.45 is the same for grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so is the 1.2. These weights are the same for grades 1 through 3, so I was able to include all the special ed kids at one time. Now, let me see what questions I missed. Yes, Jennifer, I can post this PowerPoint. How did I get to 75 segments? Let's go back and look at this. We start with 120 segments, correct? Because we have 20 kids, we know 1 kid is 6 segments. So if we take 20 times 6, every grade level in this simulation, we've got an even number of 120 segments. So if you start with that, then what you're doing in these other breakdowns is you're seeing, okay, do our kids qualify in any of these other categories where we can get more money? Because if you just turn in 120 regular segments, you're costing yourself money. So what we're trying to do here is get the kids in the actual programs that are serving them, and we just subtracted the different numbers of segments, and that's how we got to the 75 segments. Let me see if I missed any other questions here. Do we know that the 5 mainstream students are all in first grade? It doesn't matter for the reasons I just said. That's a great question, but it doesn't matter for our purposes because first grade, second grade, third grade all have the same funding weight. The primary grades are the same funding weight. Let's go back here and see if this maybe makes some more sense now. Let's go way back to where we were. So again, these red numbers are the extra funds you get, and for our simulation here, you wouldn't want to leave kids as just getting your regular funding if they actually qualify in these other programs. So that's the point of determining your segments, to determine what percentage of those 20 kids can you claim, say, in kindergarten EIP. So that's why we go about the business of counting our segments, and then if we bring our segments back into FTEs by dividing by 6, what that's allowing us to do is just simply multiply by the number the state gives us, the 2,430 base amount. So again, try one more time here. Students are FTEs. One student is 1 FTE or 6 segments. You get different amounts of funding based upon the segments and program weights. So what you're doing in the simulation is essentially grade by grade, figuring out which categories you have children that have earned funds in different programs. That's really what you're trying to figure out how to do that. You should see this in the Georgia program. I hope you see this now. You should see equity there. There's a lot of equity. Again, let's try one more time. This is equity. 2 times as much money for kindergarten EIP as you get for, dang it. Two times as much funding here for EIP as you get for high school. That's equity. All these different amounts are equity. So you should be seeing equity here. We still have a liberty aspect to this. We haven't even talked about it yet, but the local school districts in Georgia still control the local property tax levies and what to do with the revenue they receive from those levies. Some people will argue that the Georgia funding program fails in adequacy, that it's just not providing enough funding. And you do see equality in this too. A general education kindergarten student, for example, you get the same funding for students who are defined as being like other students in the same category. So of our meta values, you should see examples of all of our meta values in this program. Now normally I would like to, this is the easy part of the QBE, okay? The more challenging part, again, I'm talking way too much tonight, so forgive me. The challenging part of this, the more challenging part, is the equalization program. And it's essentially designed to help the poorer counties. We've talked about this. And there is still liberty because there still are local decisions. So I feel good about where you are, even though I know I'm throwing too much at you. But you're going to have the references or the materials available for review, and you've got document 3.3, which details all of this. And there are other resources like the video posted and other things I've posted. So I think, even though I'm talking too much and throwing too much at you, I think you can handle a little bit more. Don't I sound like a doctor that says it's going to give you a shot to make you feel better? I just kind of just said that to you. Question about differentiating between like a high school that might be on a 4-period day. The Georgia Department of Ed tells you how they want you to count those things. So it's not left to your discretion on that. If you have a schedule that doesn't fit the 6-segment stuff like a glove, the state will tell you how they want you to report that. I mean, this is serious business. We're talking about millions of dollars here, so you're not going to be allowed to be, any kind of lone ranger. The state is going to tell you if you're on a block 4 or an alternating A-B day or whatever. They're going to tell you the way you need to go about establishing this. But I don't know, I'm at the disadvantage here if I've never been an actual administrator in Georgia, so I've never actually lived under this funding model, so I can't tell you exactly the specific details that they tell the districts how they want to do this, but I'm confident, I know that they tell them how they want them to do it, but you would think it might be proportionate to the day. Sometimes it might not be as simple as that, but clearly they're going to tell you how they want you to do it. In order to receive the funds, you're going to do it the way they tell you to do it. If I missed anybody's comment or question, I'm sorry. I think I handled it. Let me just confuse you a little bit here, and then maybe between the rest of today and then having a week, and we can look at this again next week, maybe all the confusion will go away. You're still with me, yes? Let's take our breath here for 30 seconds. You're still breathing? Still smiling? Still wondering why you signed up for school finance? You're not a math major, right? See, this math is so simple, though. Isn't that simple math? Can you multiply? Can you divide? If you can, then you can do this. Let me go into the more challenging part, the equalization portion. Okay? This is the part that really determines that Georgia has a foundation program. Point number 1, there's 185 school systems, I believe, give or take, in the state of Georgia. Everyone goes through a calculation conducted by the Department of Education, and they are all ranked from the richest, which would be at the 100th percentile, all the way down to Pelham City, who's at the bottom, at the 0 percentile, the poorest system, Pelham City. So every year, everybody gets ranked by their wealth. So you must be sitting there saying, well, gee, what counts as far as wealth, right? I know that's what all of you were wondering. What counts? There's really 2 things that count to determine who's wealthy and who's not. They are the tax digest, which we can define as the value of all the property, real property and personal property in a given area. Let's think about this for a minute. So we have Meriwether County, our friends just to the south of Metro Atlanta, a rural county with small towns, not much industry, not much retail, not that many people, so therefore they have a tax digest that's very small. We have Fulton County. Our friend Pammy's not in class tonight. She had a meeting, but she works in Fulton County. Fulton County has Atlanta Braves Stadium. It has 10 Cadillac dealers, 15 Lexus dealers, 2,000 factories, etc., etc., $1,000 million mansions, on and on again. Fulton County has a very healthy tax digest. Fulton County is very wealthy. So the factors, number 1, that are counted in determining wealth is the tax digest, number 1. And number 2, it's how many kids you got. So a Gwinnett County with 165, 170,000 students, something like that, they're going to look good in part of this equation because they have so many students. So those are the 2 variables that the state of Georgia has determined count when we determine wealth. There's other things that could count. We'll talk about that next week. But in Georgia right now, the only things that do count are the tax digest and the FTE. And here's our formula. Here's how it's determined who's rich and who's not. You take the tax digest, the 40% value, you multiply it by 1 mil. And by multiplying by 1 mil, if you do that for every district in the state, it's giving you a common denominator, a common variable of comparison. If you multiply Meriwether County by 1 mil and you multiply Fulton County by 1 mil, you can compare those directly. It's the same metric. And you can see that Meriwether County can raise, let's say $100 a mil, and Fulton County can raise $1 million a mil. It gives us a way to see and compare apples to apples. That's why we multiply by 1 mil. And then there's one more part of the formula. You divide by how many kids you got, and that gives you your wealth. So again, it's the 40% tax digest times 0.001 divided by FTE. All 185 systems have the same calculation made. Before we give our example, let's look at a visual here. So we make the calculation. If you think about this as a continuum, every one of those systems is somewhere along this line. And we already know, based on what I said, that poor Pelham City is clear down here at the bottom. But everybody shows up on here somewhere. And if you are at this line or above, better switch my tool here. If you're up here, you get El Zippo as far as equalization money. And if you're down here, you get money. And the further you are down, the more money you get. So Pelham City, which is clear down here at the bottom, will get more money than, say, Gwinnett County, which is right here, just under the 75th percentile. Gwinnett would get a smaller per pupil, per mil amount than, say, Pelham City is going to get down here at the bottom. But the point is, here is our foundation. This is how a foundation program works. The state has established this process and has established this point as our foundation point. If you're up here, you don't get anything. If you're down here, you get brought up to here. Does this conceptually make sense? I'm going to pause here. How many of you know where your district is? How many of you know whether you're up here or down here? Do you know that? You should be able and can look at your district's QBE report from the state and see whether you get any of this equalization money. But I think everybody should probably know this. But again, we do the calculation for all 186 districts, put them on this continuum, and depending on where you lie, you get money or not. So let's go back here again to where we are. So everybody gets ranked. We do this calculation, tax digest times 1 mil times FTE. We rank everybody. Here's an example. Poor Pelham City, their tax digest is about $45 million. That's their 40% value. They've got 1,675 kids. So that's all you need to know to calculate this. We take their $45 million tax digest, multiply by a mil, and we learn that they can raise about $45,000 per mil. Then we divide that by their kids, and we learn that they can raise $27 per mil per kid, and that ranks them clear at the bottom. The same calculation is done for every system in the state. They're placed somewhere, darn it, they're placed somewhere on this line. And here's kind of a practical example of what you would see. Just take these numbers. I just put these numbers here as approximations. Rabun County at the top, their calculation, they can earn $491 per meal per kid. Rome City at one time was the district at the 75th percentile. They could earn about $125 per meal per kid. And then we have poor Pelham City down here. Okay, now it's time for you to put your thinking cap on. If the state has promised to bring Pelham up to this point, how much money, type the answer, how much money has the state of Georgia promised to give Pelham City per kid per meal? I agree with the 99 number because 125 is the target foundation amount. And if they're doing 26 on their own, what the state has promised them is to get them equalized at the $125 mark. So the state is sending them a check of $99 per meal that they decide to tax themselves per kid. So it is $99. Let's go back. We did our calculation for Pelham, just using this as an example. You should be able to do the same calculation for your district. These numbers are easily available for you to find. Take your tax digest, multiply by a mil, divide by how many kids you got, and that determines your ranking. These are the key points as a reminder here, the key points. Who's ever at the 75th percentile in the state, that's what the foundation amount is. At least now the state's talking about whether they want to change this or not. If you are above the foundation or at the foundation, you get nothing in terms of this extra equalizing money. And if you are below that, you get a proportionate amount to bring you up to that 75th percentile. And this is a key point. This is state money. This is money that's been raised by the state and is then returned to a local system. Well, way too much thrown at you tonight. I apologize for that. In terms of the content, we're going to take a break with a short breakout session. But before we do, who's got some commentary or questions? And we'll visit this Apple again next week. But who's got questions or commentary about this equalizing process? The critics say it doesn't equalize enough, it doesn't help enough. The critics say, and it's true, that the state sometimes doesn't even fully fund this. So even though they maybe promised to bring Pelham up here and promised Pelham $99 per meal per kid, Pelham may not get $99 per meal per kid like we see with our state austerity cuts, where sometimes you just don't get what you're supposed to get. But conceptually, to me, it's understandable. To me, it makes sense. To me, it seems a reasonably fair way to do it. It is per meal, per kid, above the 5 required fair share, which we haven't even talked about yet. Yes, that's all correct. Obviously, you've looked at the item 3.3. Other comments are welcome. I promise we'll look at this again. I know I threw too much at you, but that's really, in the last hour that I've been running my mouth here, that is the way we fund schools in Georgia. The basic categorical programs and then this extra equalization program that's designed to provide that 75th foundation amount at the 75th percentile. I'll say that correctly. Let's take a break from the brain stuff here, shall we? I'm not seeing any other comments. Let's do a quick breakout session, shall we? Getting away from theories and calculations here, let's take a few minutes and deal with a common situation related to finance, that of